Is Gemma there? Gemma, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, good. I see you now. Welcome everyone to the South Orange Library Fall Lecture Series, Special Conversations with Special People. I'm Laura Sims, and I'm really excited to be here with filmmaker Gemma Jordan. Gemma is actually my neighbor, and she's also a fellow soccer mom. So usually when we get together, we're talking about youth sports or school or other pretty mundane stuff. So it's really awesome to get a chance to talk to her about her career today. And I'm sure everyone will be really fascinated to hear about it. So let me tell everyone a little bit about Gemma. She's an Emmy award-winning filmmaker with a background in telling impactful, character-driven stories. She works for Vice News on long-form documentaries. Previously, she produced The Weekly with the New York Times and Hulu, winning an Emmy for El Chapo's Son, The Siege of Culiacan. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Her work on the criminal justice series, The Last Defense, earned her a Justice Through the Arts Award, and one of the films she produced for Vice last year is now a finalist for a DuPont Award. Most recently, she's created content for Showtime, Netflix, FX, ABC, and Hulu. So welcome, Gemma. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my first question for you is, how did you get interested in filmmaking? Like, when did that happen? And, you know, how did that happen?
It's kind of funny. I didn't really go to film school or anything like that. I really wanted to be a journalist. So I knew from quite an early age that's what I wanted to do. I used to, when I was in elementary school, I worked for like the school newspaper. And the thing that I did was talk to people about things they were upset about, like school uniform or school dinners. So even then, sort of looking at people who felt like there was some kind of injustice, you know.
Oh yeah.
And but yeah, I really wanted to be a journalist, and I actually studied journalism. I did my bachelor's degree in journalism studies, which was a really new thing at the time. You know, typically you would either just go straight to a journalism, like a vocational school, or you would you know, do your degree and then get a master's in journalism. But I just kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. I'd done a little bit of work in local like newsrooms when I was still at school, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I studied journalism, but in my final year of university at the University of Sheffield, I had the opportunity to work on a big sporting event, like TV coverage of that. And then I was kind of like, oh, this is really exciting. So that's essentially what I did when I graduated, is I went straight into television, started off in sport, and then quickly moved into documentary.
Right. And you worked early on the show, The First 48. Is that right? Was that kind of early in your career?
It was sort of early in terms of being like moving towards things with more of a kind of more of a factual bent. Like I started off in documentaries in the UK, then I came here and I was doing more kind of the lighter entertainment stuff, like home design and things like that. But I always knew I wanted to get back to more factual programming. And so The First 48 was the first opportunity that I had to do that. And so, yeah, it was sort of halfway through, I guess.
Okay. And could you tell us about that show and, you know, what it was about? Yeah.
So The First 48, it follows homicide detectives as they're investigating murders, essentially, in real time. I was not in the field. I was not going to crime scenes. I had just had my daughter, so I was in post-production, which meant I would receive all this footage and then we'd figure out how to condense it down into a story that was clear, compelling, but also stay true to the chronology of the investigation. And you know, it was kind of striking to me working on that project because there are a lot of cases that we filmed that never made it into a show because either, you know, they solved it like straight away. There was no kind of whodunit investigation aspect to it. But what was striking is that like the vast majority of those cases was young Black men killing other young Black men. And it just really kind of opened my eyes about like what was kind of going on in the cities in America. And what was interesting is oftentimes like the victim and the suspect would have a very similar background.
Mm.
And the common theme was always, poverty, lack of opportunity, and access to illegal guns, basically. And so that wasn't a series where you could really delve into any of that stuff. It's very much
Right.
like we're following the cops. You're not even questioning what the cops are doing. It's just fly on the wall. But those questions lingered with me. And so I definitely knew I wanted to keep, working around criminal justice after I worked
Right.
on that series.
Okay. And you went on to make a film about two brothers who were wrongfully convicted in Cleveland. Is that right?
Yeah, I wish I could say make, like I'd already made it. I'm still working on that.
Are you still working on that? Okay.
Yeah, it's a project I started working on several years ago. It's about
Okay.
two brothers in Cleveland who were wrongfully convicted for a murder that took place in 1975, and they were
Wow.
wrongfully convicted for almost 40 years.
Oh my God.
And there was another friend of theirs who was also convicted. So it was three young men who were convicted, all based on the testimony of one 12-year-old boy.
Oh my God.
It was a black on white crime. It was very high profile. But what ended up playing out at trial was that, there were all these witnesses that said it wasn't these men. But then there was this one witness who said it was. And in different ways, the prosecution was able to kind of undermine the other witnesses' testimony. So they were just left with this testimony from this 12-year-old boy. And then, of course, it comes out years later, decades later, that he had been kind of pressured into testifying by the police.
Wow.
And so it's a really tragic story. They were exonerated,
Okay.
but their whole lives were destroyed by this,
Right.
and not just them, also the guy who lied because he
Right.
knew
Right.
he had, he was responsible for these people being in prison. So I think the thing about that story is that it was a big story at the time because of the length, how long they'd spent in prison. But all the news coverage was very like, oh, this is so crazy, but isn't it great now that they're out, and in
Right.
terms of like delving into how can something like this happen? That didn't really happen. So there's actually a really good book about it by a writer, Carl Swenson, who I think still writes for the Washington Post, but he's from Cleveland and he's kind of investigated that story and really is like the driving force for why even they ended up being exonerated. But my documentary is sort of aiming to sort of take a deeper look into it, basically, and get into some of those bigger contextual things that led to for something like this to happen.
Right. And how did you find that story? Was it the book that led you to the story, or?
No, I met their attorney and he told me about it, and I just was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I spoke to one of the brothers, Kwame Ajamu, and he was amazing. I mean, he is one of the most positive people I've ever met. And I don't understand how you could have that mindset after what had happened to him. But we went to Cleveland and started filming with him and his brother.
Oh, great.
And it just kind of went from there, really.
Wow, that's great. And do you ever, when you're working on these projects, do you meet with resistance from either people working in the system or even like the subjects themselves, being reluctant to be filmed or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a constant battle, I think.
Yeah.
Even in that particular case in Cleveland, Kwame's older brother, Wiley Bridgman, it was very difficult to earn his trust in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it kind of went up and down because Wiley actually passed away this year, God rest his soul, but he really had suffered the most out of the three of them who were in prison because he came really close to being executed, actually. And it just had a very profound effect on his mental health, and that never went away. And it really made it hard for him to trust anybody. But also, yeah, there was also like that feeling that they'd been kind of put down by the system and taken advantage of. It was kind of hard walking into that situation, being like, "We want to film, have you tell us your story."
Right.
So that happens. That does happen a lot. I mean, there are also a lot of people that are just afraid. We're working on a project now at Vice where a lot of, I'm not directing it, someone else is, but a lot of the people that we're talking to are afraid of some sort of retribution. Um, and
Right.
so, at the end of the day, we can't promise them anything. But I think usually the reason people are willing to take part in a documentary and tell their own story is that they feel like, in some way, it's going to help kind of educate people about a bigger
Mhm.
thing than their personal story. So
Right.
that hopefully that can create some kind of change or just
Right.
awareness. And
Right.
so I find that's usually why people want to share something that's like, you know, pretty traumatic or tragic that's happened to them.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
then, then you also have situations where there are institutions that don't want to talk to you and they kind of
Yeah.
try and block you. And we definitely experienced that working on The Last Defense, the series about
Mm,
Julius Jones.
right. Which we will definitely talk about very
Yeah.
soon. I mean, we could talk about it now if you want.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. I mean,
okay. Could
just in terms of like access, I guess. Well, yeah. Do you want me to talk about what it?
Sure. Yeah. If you could introduce it, talk about it a bit, and then we have that clip to show. We have a
Yeah.
short clip,
Okay.
but if you want to kind of set it up first, that would be great.
Yeah.
Tell us the case.
So The Last Defense was a series that kind of delved into two death row cases where there was some question about the person's guilt, um, in the hopes of being able to kind of look more broadly at the criminal justice system. So I sort of was producing and did a little bit of directing, but mainly producing 3 hours about a guy called Julius Jones who's on death row in Oklahoma. In fact, his execution date is coming up next week.
Okay.
Um, and he was convicted of a murder that took place in July 1999 in Oklahoma City. It was very tragic. It was a man and his two kids and his sister. They had been out school supply shopping, and they pulled into his driveway, and he was shot in the head um, during the course of a carjacking that went very, very tragically wrong.
Yeah.
And so he was killed. This was in a suburb of Oklahoma City called Edmond. Um, there's a racial component to the story again because it's very traditionally white neighborhood. It was even a white flight neighborhood back in the day. And the perpetrator was a young black man. Um, and Julius was arrested 3 days after the crime and always maintained his innocence and was convicted, and has been in prison ever since. And so what we did was really kind of look into the case from start to finish, focused on the crime and the investigation and then the trial and then kind of recent efforts to get him released.
Mhm. Great. And should we show the clip now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Michael, if you have that clip, we can show it now. Michael, here it is.
Yay.
Is there sound? I'm not getting any sound on it.
Top left, maybe.
Is anybody hearing it?
No.
Okay.
No sound.
No sound.
All right, let me try one more thing.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of access, that this particular story was very difficult to get access to certain people.
Okay.
And there were various ways that we had to try and work around that, which I can talk about.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that. And was Julius Jones himself, receptive to working on the film, to being the subject of the film?
Eventually, I mean, it was kind of a process to first, speak to his defense attorneys and then meet with his family and speak to him.
Right.
It took a little while, but I think the fact that no one had really looked into his case before, it really hadn't been covered by even, any print journalists aside from, the basics of what happened back in the day. People did cover the trial and stuff like that, but no, there weren't any investigative journalists in Oklahoma that had looked into it at all. So he'd never really talked to anybody when we first started speaking to him, in almost 2 decades. So, here we go.
Let's see. Still no sound. Well, I saw your name though, Gemma.
Oh, great. Sound like my mom.
There's Gemma.
It's not that thing on top left, is it, that says turn on original sound?
Oh.
Oh no, that's something on my computer.
And how did you find, if no one was investigating the story, how did you find, who found the story and picked it up and thought this would be a great subject for the documentary?
Lack of investigation.
Oh, here we go.
So much evidence pointing to his innocence.
When I actually started trial, I had on my suit. I had a whole bunch of different people asking me, are you a lawyer? Who you work for? I mean, I couldn't do nothing but smile about it. Like, these people have no idea, I'm fighting for my life. I have no control over anything. I'm nobody.
It was the most high-profile murder in the county that year. The district attorney's office had their A team prosecuting it. Sandra Elliott was the main prosecutor. She was Bob Macy's second hand in the Terry Nichols trials for the Oklahoma City bombing.
Under District Attorney Bob Macy, the number of death penalty cases that came out yearly put a substantial burden on defense lawyers. There were often not enough experienced capital trial lawyers.
My name is David McKenzie. I was the lead trial counsel for Julius Jones. At the time, I didn't have any death penalty trial experience.
At the time of the crime, I was still in law school. I passed the bar exam, was sworn in. I'd never tried a capital case. I'd only seen it from the sidelines.
We had an uphill struggle. One of the disadvantages of working in the public defender's office is you don't have a whole lot of time. I don't know what my caseload was, but I'm sure it was more than 70 or 80.
Wow. Thank
According
you, Michael.
to Julius, David did not see.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Wow. That's a great clip. That's really powerful when he says, I'm nobody.
Yeah, it became clear from talking to him, having him tell that the story of, this thing that happened back when he was 19 when the murder took place. I think by the time the trial happened, he was 20, 21 years old. And that feeling of not really knowing what was going to happen, feeling like you know, at some point things are going to be okay, but not really knowing. And yeah, I thought that was really interesting when he said that this sort of juxtaposition of people in the courthouse saying, "Oh, you look so smart," you know, and giving him these sort of props, not knowing that he was a defendant, and then there he is sitting, you know, on trial in a capital murder case.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, the access so to Julius was a little trickier than we had thought it would be when we started working on it, because Oklahoma law says that death row inmates can talk to the media and can do on-camera interviews, and they had traditionally done so. In fact, there'd just been a series about a guy named Richard Glossip on death row in Oklahoma, and they were able to go in and, you know, sit down and interview him. But at that point, they stopped and they said no. So it meant we had to kind of pivot a little bit. And in some ways, I think it made it a little bit more intimate, because, you know, the audio you could hear of Julius, that was him talking to me on the phone. And those conversations were, you know, longer than they would have been if we'd gone in and had like an hour to do an interview on camera. So, but in the beginning it was, you know, talking to him like 2 or 3 times a week, because we didn't know if our access would get cut off. So we're just trying to talk as much as possible about every aspect of the case. And I think one of my biggest regrets is that it's not, you don't hear my questions or pressing him on things, you know? So it's not totally clear, I don't think, how much like we were pressing on him to explain certain things. But the biggest issue with access in that documentary was that the district attorney's office basically told the police department and a bunch of other people not to participate in the documentary. So that just made it difficult to not have the side of law enforcement or the prosecutors involved. We were able to kind of get around it a little bit because we found some retired police officers that were peripherally involved in the case, but we were never able to talk to the lead investigators on camera, which I think, you know, would have been really interesting.
The DA like ordered people not to do it, or just, you know, encouraged them not to participate?
Well, in a place like Oklahoma, the district attorneys in different counties have a lot of power. So if the district attorney tells you not to do something, then you don't do it.
Right.
Yeah. And that was another thing. There were some people that we interviewed who were a little bit intimidated by the DA's office and didn't want to participate or wanted to be anonymous. So that's something that, yeah, it was difficult. Access on that project was difficult.
Yeah, I bet. And I wanted to mention, for people who wanted to watch the whole film, how can they find it? It's online, right?
I'm not sure. It might be there. So we did 3 hours in 2018, I think it aired on ABC, but then it may have been put up on ABC Go after that. I'm not sure. I think they have links up on the Justice for Julius website, but 2020 also did a special last year that I was somewhat involved in, where they condensed the 3 hours down to 2 and added some updates at the end. And I think that's on ABC Go. Okay.
And just before we showed the trailer, I was asking about how you found that story, since you said, you know, there weren't investigative reporters doing work on it. Like, how did it come to your?
There was a team of journalists and producers that were looking for stories before I even joined the project, and I believe that they had posted something to some kind of defense attorney message board, and Julius Jones' attorneys responded to that.
I see.
It's kind of an unusual way to find something like that, but you know, but there were a lot of cases that were assessed in that process to see
Yeah,
which one did we want to look at, cover.
right. And how did the film affect his case? Because there've been some changes, right? Could you just tell us what's happened since that film came out?
Yeah, I mean, I think, being on ABC, having Viola Davis was an executive producer, so it just gave it a lot of eyes. And
Right.
there were some folks in Oklahoma City that didn't know about it, that watched it and were kind of moved by his story and wanted to help, basically. So they started this Justice for Julius campaign, and as well as his friend who appears in the documentary and his family. But there were some people that kind of watched the film, and then they all kind of came together, and it's been kind of striking to see how much exposure it's had since then, with various celebrities getting involved, and even now this week leading up to his execution next week, you have conservatives, Republican lawmakers in Oklahoma who are coming out and saying that they believe that the governor should commute Julius's sentence. And it's just worth noting that the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board has reviewed the case twice now, first in a commutation hearing, and then just last week in a clemency hearing. And they both times voted to commute his sentence from death to life with the possibility of parole. And now that decision is in the hands of the governor, Kevin Stitt.
And does he have up until the execution date, basically, to commute that sentence?
Yeah. And
Wow.
of course, he could just do nothing. So
Right.
It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. So when you're working on stories like these, and how do you protect yourself emotionally? Because I imagine it can be very hard to deal with this matter, the subject matter.
Yeah. I mean, it can be draining, for sure. I think that for me, like, especially doing stuff, about criminal justice and where there potentially has been some injustice, the act of sort of doing something that's going to, just kind of give people information about a particular case, and maybe like throw out some questions, have people consider it more. It's just, it's more rewarding to me than sort of just being frustrated by it and sitting back, like it feels like you're hopefully like contributing to the debate about some of these bigger issues. So it makes it worth it, but it can be difficult. That was a particularly tough one. Especially having conversations with somebody, whether they're guilty or innocent, they're sitting in a box, in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, and you're talking to them, and maybe you're the first person they've really spoken to in a long time. That is just really kind of mind-blowing sometimes when you're sort of walking along the street and enjoying the leaves falling or and then you sort of think about somebody who's in that situation who hasn't been outside. Really, they don't really go outside, even during rec. So it's kind of covered.
That's for the it's covered.
Death row inmates, in Oklahoma, and they're kind of in a bunker. So it's just, it does affect you. It just changes your perspective on things, I guess. Like, it makes you very grateful for your own life, and it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask you about working as a woman in the film industry. And I'm just curious, have you encountered obstacles, sexism, and so on during your career? And has it gotten better? Has it gotten better in recent years, do you think? Are things improving?
Yes, I would say definitely they're improving. I definitely have experienced, you know, been in situations where people have said things inappropriate earlier on in my career when I was younger.
Right.
Especially working in sport.
Oh.
I definitely have, you know, been in situations where I someone who is doing the same job as me, but who is male, is being paid more than I am. I've definitely had people, men, pass off ideas that I've had as their own. Yeah, I mean that stuff still happens sometimes, but it's definitely getting better. And I'm, you know, I think the Me Too movement has been really good for media as a whole. It's now, you know, we're now at the point where if something, you know, inappropriate is said or happens, you know, you can talk to someone about it. And I'm definitely, you know, just at the point in my career where if someone says something inappropriate, I'm not going to let them, I'm not going to let it go.
Right.
And if they don't like being called out on it, then I'm just not going to stay silent, you know?
Yeah. Right. That's great. And did you have you had, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that there's, you know, the industry still has a long way to go. And not just with, you know, female directors, but also, you know, people of color. And I worked with Amani Martin on The Last Offense, who is African-American, and, you know, it was the first time I'd worked with a director who was Black, which is, you know, I'd worked with plenty of people of color, but not a director, you know, because that's this elevated role. And that was pretty eye-opening. You know, I would say that to him, actually. It's really messed up, but this is, you know, but I think sometimes there's this drive to sort of put a Band-Aid on things like, oh, we need more diversity, you know, but it really starts from the ground up. You need to train people and be really thoughtful about that process, and not just kind of have knee-jerk reaction to things. Where you're looking at, like, you know, what's the ratio of male, female, you know, white, minority, like that's really not the way to do it. Any enterprise, I think, is better if there are people with very different perspectives coming together. And that's one of the things that's great about filmmaking, is it is such a collaborative process, you know, being able to, you know, hear other people's ideas and consider them and be open-minded and respect that process is really important.
I envy that as a writer, just because, you know, it's such an isolating creative process that I can imagine. I mean, I like that too, but I also look at like film or other more collaborative, you know, arts making and envy it. That collaborative, you know, it's a great part.
That's been the hardest part about working remotely, actually, I think, is we still have those conversations, but we're not physically in the same room, moving at like story cards around on the wall like we would have done. You know, hopefully that's going to start to change, but we definitely have creative discussions all the time, but there's nothing like being, you know, locked in a room together trying to get to the bottom of something.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. And do you see yourself going in different directions from criminal justice as well in your work, or do you think you'll stay mostly in that area?
I mean, I do, you know, I don't just do criminal justice stuff. So definitely, I do find myself being pulled back to that a lot. Just because once you work on something about the criminal justice system, you realize that the system works differently for different groups of people, and, you know, and that's a story worth telling that isn't going away. And there are different ways you can explore that, different kinds of stories, right? Everyone knows the story of Robert Durst and the Jinx, someone who came from a very privileged background who got away with murder for a really long time. So I think there's different ways to come at it, but I'm sure I'm going to keep being pulled back into that. But I've been working on a bunch of really interesting stuff at Vice this past year, a lot of international current affairs stuff, which has been really interesting, including the film you mentioned that is now a finalist for the DuPont Columbia Journalism Award.
Oh, right.
That's about the explosion that happened in Beirut in 2020.
Yeah.
It's sort of through the lens of a hospital that was in the blast range. And they basically had given us all this surveillance footage from inside the hospital. And so we were able to piece together that day using the surveillance footage and doing interviews with doctors and nurses and patients who were there in the hospital. So it's this really intense kind of TikTok of that day. And also asks bigger questions about, how did this happen?
Right. Oh, that's great. And I know you're working on kind of a personal project right now. If you wanted to talk about that, your new one that you've been traveling to England for.
Yeah, this is really different for me. It's a project about my own family, my own father, who was a professional soccer player in the UK, in England, back in the 70s and 80s. So when I was pretty young. And he now has a neurodegenerative disease that we believe was caused by playing soccer and heading the ball and other head injuries. And so it's actually a very hot topic in the UK right now, dementia in football, soccer. And the idea is that it's looking at, my dad's case in particular and how our family is kind of processing that and dealing with that. And actually, one kind of element of that is, not just sort of accepting this, and just dealing with it. It's like, okay, I couldn't not make a film about this, even though it's difficult to, work on a project that's so very personal. And I often feel like, am I doing the right thing? But my family, we're all kind of in agreement that we want to do this. So we'll keep plowing ahead with that. But it's also kind of looks back at his career as a footballer, because he's sort of forgetting all of that now. So it's like revisiting that with him.
Right.
Interesting.
So you've got archival footage and
it's a lot of archival. We're going back and visiting places that were, important in his career and in his life. And it's kind of nice, like revisiting that stuff with him, because I was very young when he retired. I was 7. So I have older siblings that have a much better recollection of him as a soccer player. But like for me, he was coming to the end of his career when my memories began. So there's something kind of nice about revisiting that with him, but it's really hard. And I'm in the film, which is totally weird.
Oh no. It's weird to be on the other side of the camera, huh?
Yeah, I don't like it at all.
Do you have people interviewing you, or are you just interviewing yourself kind of, or talking?
Yeah, I sit and interview and then I turn the camera around. No. Basically, we're still figuring it out, but no, I mean, basically we're filming a lot of fly on the wall stuff, so some of that I'm in and some of it I'm not. Some of it I'm like, at the side of the camera, like, asking questions. I think it will have my voice in it as voiceover.
Oh, good.
Is
Okay.
How my perspective will be in there, I think.
Yeah. That's great. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Really
It's
fascinating.
going to be a long process though, again.
Right. How long do you think it would take?
Well, if you have backing from a network, and they want to make it and you have a production schedule, it could be, it varies really. I mean, a year.
Okay, but you have to provide them with like part of the film first, or what do you show them to get their backing?
Yeah, usually, I mean, it depends, but usually you'll send them, a few minutes of something that you've put together that kind of represents your kind of vision or where you think the film's going to go.
Okay.
But it's a tough process, pitching. So we kind of hit a wall with that, but I'm obviously going to keep going. We hit a wall in the UK, but it's a very UK story. So, but I'm going to keep making it, and then, we can certainly go back to some of those people and show them more at a later date.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a very timely issue. And here too, I mean, with football and all the talk about traumatic brain injuries, seems like it would be very relevant here too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I just don't know that people here would get as...
What's that?
I don't know that people here will get as excited about the archive. It's like,
well,
people
soccer's
in the UK.
becoming so popular here. So maybe. True.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Gemma. I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has questions. If we have any audience questions, you can pipe up. I'll give you a chance to, and you can unmute yourself. I think everyone has been muted. Is that right, Michael? Can they unmute themselves? Or maybe you can unmute everybody.
Yes. I prompted everyone to unmute.
Okay, thank you. So any questions for Gemma? Come on, there must be questions.
It's Clara. Are you raising your hand, Clara?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
No, you went.
My hands are down here.
You don't have a question for Gemma?
I think between Gemma and you, Laura, you really covered so much material.
Are you interested in watching The Last Defense now? The film that we Yeah.
It's interesting that this week that Dr. Phil has these cases of people who years ago were killed or ambushed or something, and now the family is still wanting answers, true answers.
Right. Oh, right. Okay. That was on Dr. Phil this week?
Yeah, I think two different cases.
Wow.
One was a husband that was shot or killed in his driveway. And at the time they blamed it on, because he was an undercover police officer investigating drugs. So they assumed that was the reason, but now 30 years later, the wife doesn't think that's the reason.
Wow. That's interesting. I think these kind of unsolved cases are always so fascinating for us. I know I'm fascinated by them. You want to figure out what happened, what really happened. And
the ones that upset me are the people who were convicted of a crime or sent to jail, and then years and years later, because of new evidence or DNA. I mean, I can't even imagine having been locked up for 20 years and then being suddenly free.
Right.
This is hard to comprehend.
Yeah, the men in Cleveland I was talking about, Kwame Ajamu and Wiley Bridgman, they were incarcerated when they were, I think Kwame was 18, 17.
Oh my goodness.
And his brother was 20. So they missed out on that whole period of their life where they would have been, getting married, having children, having some sort of career. And by the time they were released, they're middle-aged, and all of their sort of immediate family had passed on, their parents and their siblings.
Wow.
Because I think it was such a traumatic thing for the whole family that two of them were wrongfully incarcerated. It caused so much stress on the family, and they couldn't even go to their funerals, you know. And talking to them about their childhood and saying, oh, do you have any photographs? There's no photographs anywhere because all that stuff somehow got lost while they were in prison, and so they don't even have those kind of mementos that memories that you normally have. Yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
I wonder how that compares to people who are like prisoners of war and then finally get released. It's not exactly, it's not the same, but still.
Yeah. It's hard to think about what that would be like. And like you were saying, Gemma, the one guy, I think it was Kwame, he's like so positive after having been wrongfully, convicted and imprisoned for so many years. Like, how do you achieve that?
Yeah, I think that's part of why he survived it as well as he did, because of his, I mean, I don't know what he was like, back then. I think he was probably had to be quite a different person when he was in prison, but definitely he talked about always feeling on edge, when he was in prison. But yeah, he still struggles, he gets like very emotional just very quickly, and he can't control that. So I mean, probably from all those years of having to be non-emotional.
Right.
I'm not a psychologist, but it is very interesting, his whole kind of outlook, for sure.
Wow.
Inspiring.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, their story is complicated, right? Because there's like some hope there because they did get released, and they but there's so much tragedy in it too. The guy that was pressured to lie, he had a really difficult life because he was always carrying that burden, and I don't think he ever fully, he really wanted forgiveness, wanted to forgive himself, but I think he was really chasing that and could never really find it.
Yeah. Wow. I was wondering unless someone else has a question, I was wondering what documentary films have been influential to you or inspiring to you, or certain directors that you find inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this vein, there's a lot of documentaries that I've enjoyed, like The Staircase. I really liked that series.
That was great.
It was, it's quite different. They were obviously on the ground and filming stuff in real time. I like the, Paradise Lost series that Joe Berlinger did back in the day.
Yeah.
And there's been a few more recent ones. There's actually a series on Netflix called The Innocent Man a few years ago that was about two other guys in Oklahoma who were wrongfully convicted, actually, that I really enjoyed. But I've been watching a lot more kind of personal type narratives, like Time was really good. I don't know if you've seen that.
No. What is that one?
That is about a woman whose husband is incarcerated, but she took all this like home video.
Yeah.
Before he went to prison, and then over the years, sort of spans decades. That's a really powerful film.
Wow.
In that it doesn't really, it doesn't go too much into the context about like why, like what are the forces at play that mean that her, partner has been in prison for so long. for, I forget exactly what the crime is, but I don't believe it was a violent crime, but there may have been it may have been an armed robbery actually. But it doesn't really delve into the sort of industrial prison complex or any of that stuff, but
Yeah.
you see the effect of it on this family. And
Right.
but it's also very inspiring because she's a very powerful woman who raises several children during this time. And but yeah, that's a really good one. I would highly recommend that.
Okay. Do you know where you can watch that?
Yeah, I think it's on Amazon Prime right now, actually.
Okay. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. Are you ever interested in like feature films at all? In making them, or?
Do you mean feature docs or like
I mean, like scripted. Yeah.
There was a period where I was sort of trying to work on a screenplay, but I found it really difficult. I think I'm better at like capturing, real life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seemed like, oh, wouldn't it be great if you could actually just like, because it's difficult capturing real life. Like you say, people don't want to participate, or
right.
You just have a lot of obstacles sometimes in trying to tell a story.
Right.
So there's something appealing about telling a story that's, totally scripted.
Yeah.
It's more controlled.
Yes. That is what I like about writing fiction.
Yeah.
So whenever I think about, I would like to write a nonfiction book someday, but whenever I really think about what that means, going out, doing interviews, then I don't know about this.
Yeah.
Maybe if it were just like a research, like a historical nonfiction, I could imagine that. But yeah, the lack of control is what, like, I think I might go crazy if I took that on. So I really admire that.
That's also the beauty in it, though. That's sort of the beauty in it, because you don't know, it's unpredictable. Right. And then something happens that you manage to capture, and that's like really rewarding.
Right, I'm sure.
And it can be a very small thing,
Yeah.
A look on somebody's face, or
wow.
That speaks volumes. You don't need to explain it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
that's true. I imagine like also the process of having all of that footage that you take and then editing it down, like you were talking about earlier, to, compelling 90 minutes or whatever, is also just really intense.
Yeah, it is. It's really challenging, but it's an exciting challenge usually.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels weird saying that about some of these stories where, it's about like a tragedy that's happened, but it's a bit like doing a puzzle, and trying to figure out the puzzle. And and I guess the rewarding part is that there are so many different ways to put that puzzle together.
Right. Yeah.
So I love that part of the process, even though it becomes very time consuming and kind of, you kind of get into this mode where you're so focused on that story that you're working on that it's hard to like pull back from that and then be present in your own life.
I'm sure for your kids' soccer game or your
yeah.
Well, thank you, Gemma, so much for joining us. This was really fascinating. I learned so much. I know we all learned so much about filmmaking, and the work you're doing is so important. And thank you for doing that work. It's great.
Thanks for having me. Chat. It's a nice little distraction from another intense story that we're working on.
Oh gosh. Well, I just want to tell everyone that I just want to say that because of the holiday coming up, we won't have any more Friday lectures this month. So we'll see everyone back here on December 3rd with Alex Torpy, who's the former president of South Orange Village. So he'll be back with us. He's going to be talking about ways to improve civic engagement. And so please enjoy the holiday, and we'll see you in December. And thank you again so much, Gemma. That was wonderful. And thank you, Michael.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.